Hi everybody, I'm Caitlin. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I am a certified and licensed speech-language pathologist in Pennsylvania. I primarily work with pediatrics and I sort of specialize in augmentative communication. I'm going to kind of go over an overview of AAC and how it can be used in children or adults with complex communication needs. And as we go, at the end, think of questions, and I'm happy to answer any of them. So just a little bit of an overview of what I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about AAC itself. What is it? I'm sure you guys are kind of familiar with AAC, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Just some comparisons on different types of AAC systems and AAC itself. And then the evaluation and implementation process that we go through when we're deciding on a system and we're going to use it with one of our individuals. And then we're going to talk about some fact and fiction, some things that we hear a lot that may or may not be true, some resources, and then I'll answer any questions that you have. Okay? So, speech and language disorders. We think about speech and language development, right? It's kind of a complicated process. So if you think about when children are developing, they hear sounds, they hear words, right? And then eventually they start to attend to specific words. So they might attend to a specific voice, or they might attend to a specific word. They start to look. They look towards mom when they hear mom's voice. Then after that, they start to babble, and they start to imitate some of those sounds that they've heard. And you hear the ba 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 and the ma 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 as they're babbling. From that, we start to build words. And then the next step, they have to learn all of the rules that go into putting words together. That's where we get into grammar and syntax. And when we're young little kids, our words go together, but they don't really make sense, and they're kind of out of order. And as we get older, we learn the rules of the words, how they go in order in the sentences. So it's no surprise, though, that speech and language disorders arise, because it's a really complicated process on learning language. They have a really tough job trying to learn how to get all of that information they're hearing and they're understanding and how to take it and put it out into the world. So, speech and language impairments are one of the most common disorders in young children. It's estimated that the prevalence in 3 to 6-year-olds is about 11%. That was as of 2016. They didn't release the data for this year quite yet. So, talking about that really complicated process of learning language and learning how to talk. Most children eventually do talk, but when they don't, they take longer, or they may not develop verbal speech, or the verbal speech may not be as clear as we need it to be, or they might only have a couple of words. So what do? We have to identify their complex communication needs. So if you think about when you're learning language, let's say you have a dog in your home, and your child eventually learns the word dog. You go out into the world, and then they see a cat. And what does the child say? Dog, right? Because it's 4 legs, and it walks on all 4 legs, and it has like a tail. No, that's not a dog, that's a cat. So now we're taking it to another level on how to learn all these language skills. These complex communication needs come in because they may not understand the vocabulary. They might be overgeneralizing words. They may not be able to produce the words. How many have heard of a child that can't produce their K sound, right? So it's tats. So dog sounds a lot easier to them, let's be honest. So they have these complex communication needs, and what do? How are we going to help them? So if you think about how we interact on a day-to-day basis, what do we use? We use words, right? So if we don't have the words, what are we going to do for our kids? Additionally, when you're in schools, you need language, right? So 3 to 12% of preschoolers in special education there are 3 to 12% of preschoolers in special education, and 37% of students with significant cognitive disabilities in the United States. So these are the populations that we're most of the time providing AAC systems for, is in these children with either special education needs, cognitive disabilities, or the complex communication needs. So what do we do when we don't have the language? We can implement something called augmentative and alternative communication. So AAC is any tool or strategy that are used when we don't have the language on our own. So augmented means in addition to. So right now I'm speaking to you. If I were to step away from the mic, you may or may not hear me. The augment for me is this microphone. It's in addition to my own voice. Alternative is instead of. So this is where we are using something like a picture card, or we're using something like an iPad or communication device. That is our instead of our verbal speech. And then there's also a little category inside of AAC that we look at that's called assistive technology. So that's any form of technology that assists in daily activities and daily tasks. So that could be something like a switch that would open the door for us. So when you come into this building and you have these big doors, we see those big blue signs for the handicap entrances, right? And you push that and it opens the door for you. Technically, that is assistive technology. So, who might benefit from AAC? We look at AAC for individuals with intellectual disability, autism spectrum disorder, any known genetic disorders, motor speech disorders. This is your apraxia and dysarthria. We have craniofacial differences. Those are your cleft palates, your velopharyngeal insufficiencies, that hypernasality. They sound really, really nasal. Expressive language disorders, which is what we discussed earlier in that language development. Then we also use it sometimes in post-tracheostomy and selective mutism. The important thing to note here, though, is that effective communication is needed throughout the entire lifespan. So initially we talked about preschoolers, right, and that they have complex communication needs and they needed to participate in their education. But now we're getting into middle school, high school, job force, retirement. We need it for working, we need it for education, we need it for socialization, and we need it for meeting all of our wants and our needs. So when we go to the store, if we can't find something we need, how do we get it? We go up to a staff member and we ask them, where can I find the bread? Where can I find the peanut butter? In northeastern Pennsylvania, the peanut butter is always moved every other month in the stores. I don't know why. But I always have to go up to somebody and say, oh, sorry, where did you move the peanut butter to? But if I didn't have the words, if I didn't have the vocabulary, if I didn't have the language, I wouldn't be able to meet my needs as an adult. Additionally, I use language every day in my work because I'm a speech language pathologist. But any form of working, you need some form of communication, whether it's to answer the phone, whether it's to answer a question, to request help. You can use communication. So it's throughout the entire lifespan that we are looking at for using AAC to support language needs. So there's two different types of augmentative communication. You guys might be familiar with some of these. There are unaided and aided augmentative communication. So unaided includes facial expressions. So how many of you know of a child that may or may not have words, but you feel like they can let you know what they want or what they need through their facial expressions, right? So if you'd say, well, how do you know what they like? You can tell when they're smiling or they get excited and you can see it in their face. So facial expressions is a form of augmentative communication. Aided would be picture cards. So I can hand you the picture card of the peanut butter that I can't find in the store, and then you can give me the peanut butter. We also have vocalizations and gestures on the unaided side. So when I'm really, really happy, I might start to use my voice and vocalize, and I might clap my hands, and I might smile. Those are all forms of unaided AAC. So there's nothing that I'm using but my own body. For the aided, those are your picture cards, your speech generating devices, and your switches. I'm using something in addition to my own body. So we're going to talk a little bit about aided communication first with the AAC. So there's kind of this spectrum of aided systems, and it goes from low tech, no tech, all the way up to high tech. So your low tech is pencil and paper. We have alphabet boards, the pictures, and photos. So you can use actual photographs, or you can use the picture cards like in PECS. You can do writing, so we have children that are literate, that just write with pen and paper, but they don't have verbal speech, oftentimes in either selective mutism or apraxia dysarthria. Moving up the spectrum, we have these single message switches. So the one that's on the screen, that's called a Big Mac. So when you touch it, it speaks one message. So you record a message. So it could be you hit the button and it says, "Hi, my name is Caitlin," as a greeting. You would have to program that message though. So if you need to change it, you have to record it on the fly. Moving further up that spectrum, we have these fixed display speech generating devices. That means that what you see is all there really is. So what you see on the screen right now, that's a GoTalk, that's a physical display. So all of those buttons, those are your choices, and they're recorded based on each single button. And then on the high-tech end of the spectrum, we have these dynamic display speech generating devices. These are things like your iPads, your Dynavoxes, your Pranky Romics. These are the ones that when I touch a button, the screen is going to change, so I get to another screen. All right, so moving on with that one, we're going to talk about a couple different types of AAC. Today we're going to talk about sign language, PECS, fixed display speech generating devices, and dynamic display speech generating devices. These are kind of the gamuts that I'm going to focus on just for today. But just know that there are more out there. So you can use these switches, you can use text-to-speech systems, and you can use writing, but we're going to focus on these ones today. So the first one is sign language. And sign language is a real language. Words have orders, just like in spoken language. You would combine them in a specific order. So here we use American Sign Language. Before 1990, this was really the most common form of AAC for children that didn't have verbal vocal speech. It's often used in verbal behavior programs, and anything is more ABA-based. There is research, and some will argue that for individuals with intellectual disability, it might be easier to learn sign language over using picture representation. And that comes down to more of that symbolic representation. As a speech therapist, we look more at what's called a total communication approach. So we would look at introducing sign, speech, and an AAC system like a dedicated device all together simultaneously to really support communication and language skills. So some of the pros of sign language are that it's unlimited. So the more that you learn, the more that you use. It's not like I have to wait for someone to program a new button on my sign language because I'm just learning the sign. So as I keep learning, I have all of this vocabulary. Obviously, it's portable because I'm going to walk around with these and I don't have to carry anything with me. It's inexpensive. You can get applications on an iPhone for about $10 to learn new sign language. You also can find resources online. Be wary of resources you find online because not all are created equally. But it is a little bit cheaper than an iPad. And then it's a pretty fast rate of communication. If you've ever seen someone that is pretty fluent in ASL, they are able to move really quickly and have a full conversation. If you're using some form of aided assistive technology of AAC device, it's a little bit slower. You have to navigate through folders, you have to find the right symbol. If you're using PECS, you have to flip through the pages to find the right picture card, to then go find your communication partner. It's a little bit more of a process. Some of the downsides, though, of sign language is not everyone knows sign. So it's really, really great that you have this big vocabulary, but if not all your communication partners know sign, it's not going to get you what you need. And also, it's just a lot of learning demands, not only on the person using it, but then on their communication partner. So we have to teach not only, we'll say, a child sign language, but we now have to teach their parents sign language, and their teacher sign language, and their TSS staff sign language, so that everyone is able to communicate with the individual. It's also very difficult to use sign language if there are motor impairments. So if there are fine motor impairments, some signs get very, very intricate with their finger movements, and it's very difficult to implement some of those more specific signs when they don't have really strong fine motor movements. So moving forward, we have PECS. Has everyone heard of PECS here? Like kind of a show of hands? Okay. So PECS is Picture Exchange Communication System. This was developed kind of as an ABA principle by Bondi and Frost in 1985, and it's more of a training protocol. So there are phases to PECS. It kind of starts at how to communicate. So we interrupt the child from accessing what they want and teaching them that you have to exchange this picture to get what you want. I need someone with me to get what I want. So we're teaching them that I need you to get what I want. And then it moves up to distance and persistence. So now the child has to go find the picture card, then find me to get what they want, as opposed to me being right there to interrupt it. So we're just gonna kind of build up that they'll come find me to communicate with me. And then it moves into discrimination where we have more choices. So it's not just that one picture. Now we have a couple different options. Then we build sentences, and then we answer questions, and then we work on commenting. So we always kind of start with requests. If you think about typical development for children, what's the first word that your child usually says? Mom or dad. Sometimes it's stop or no. If you're my daughter, it's no. But it's more of a request, right? They're saying mom because they're requesting your attention. They're saying mom to kind of get you to come over. And if you think about preschoolers, kind of everything is a request. Like, I want cookies, I want crackers, I want juice, I want this toy, I want to go to Toys R Us. So, we're doing a lot more requesting. And then we move into more words, and then we move into answering questions. Well, what do you want? Oh, I want cookies. It's not just cookies. It's, I'm going to answer these questions. And then I move into commenting, like, oh my goodness, look at that toy on that shelf. Or look at that little doggy over here. So we're kind of following that same pattern with PECS and what we're targeting. We always start at requests because honestly, it's the most motivating thing. What's going to benefit you most? Getting that really great snack that you want or that really cool toy that you like. So some of the pros of PECS is that they are quite durable. If you think about it, they're pieces of paper that have been laminated, and they're pretty easy to replace also. They're relatively inexpensive. If you have the program for Mayor Johnson to build out those symbols, once you pay for that, you could just keep printing. It's the cost of ink and paper and laminating paper. They're relatively easy to understand. So for me, if I don't know sign language, but you hand me a picture of a cookie, I could probably figure out that you want a cookie. They're pretty easy to understand as a communication partner and also as the child learning it. And then also, it's really research supported for children with autism. Now here are some of the downsides of PECS. The complexity is kind of constrained. You're not going to be able to build these really grammatically appropriate sentences when you're using PECS. You're going to get pretty much up to I want whatever it is, or I see the blue ball, or I need paper. You can get a couple contractions in there like and is, but the complexity of the sentences you're building aren't going to really be there with PECS. Additionally, there's no voice output. So if I'm over here and I go through my PECS binder and I find what I need, but you're all the way over there and I'm just sitting here like this, you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing, right? So I'm not able to gain your attention, especially in a medical emergency. So I may not be able to gain your attention with a PEC card. So without that voice output, that is one major con for us when we're looking at a system. And additionally, it is slower rate of speech and communication than something like sign language or verbal vocal because I have to go through and I have to find the picture card and then hand it to you to get what I want. And they are relatively cumbersome. If you've looked at a PECS binder, it's pretty thick and there's a whole lot of pages in there and then there's a lot of Velcro and all of those picture cards add more and more depth. It's really surprising how that little picture card can add so much thickness to a binder. So now we're going to kind of talk about these fixed displays. So we're not talking about iPads yet. These are more of your GoTalks, those physical GoTalks. So this has voice output, but the display is not changing. So it's always the same pictures in front of the child. They kind of vary widely based on the specifications that you need. So the GoTalk comes in like a field of 9, it comes in a field of 24 or 20. So it depends on what you find your child needs. They're not kind of this one size fits all. You can get it specific to your child. You can have one message all the way up to multiple messages with these. So this one is a single message. That's the one we talked about earlier. This one is a GoTalk 9, and then you'll see it kind of sounds a little silly because I called it GoTalk 9, but there are 12 buttons. So the 9 buttons are the things that the child may or may not request, and the 3 across the top always stay consistent. Those are those core vocabulary words. And core vocabulary are words that I would use and you would use and somebody in the next room might use. They're consistent across people and across settings. So those are words like want and need and yes and no and stop. So those 3 don't count in the 9 when they count with the GoTalk. And then this one is a visual scene on a GoTalk. So what they do is they print out a picture, and there's little spots on that when I touch it, it'll play the recorded message. So some of the pros to using a fixed display is that they are relatively cheap. A GoTalk runs about $1,000 and under, which sounds like a lot of money, but if you think about a dynamic display, they're in the tens of thousands of dollars. So in perspective, they're relatively cheap. They are relatively durable. You can throw it and you're not going to crack that dreaded iPhone screen that if you drop it like from here to here, it now has this big splinter across it. They're really durable. You can chuck it, you can throw it, and it's not going to fall apart. They're relatively easy to program and they're easy to use. It's pretty straightforward with that one. And you have that voice output. So now I'm able to gain your attention. I'm able to tell you what I want and what I need. So the downsides are that it is relatively limited. So if you think about the GoTalk 9, I have 9 options. Those are the only 9 things I get to talk to you about today. There are levels on a GoTalk, so I can change the pages out with those recorded messages, but I have to wait for someone to help me change that page. So until they change that page, I can tell you 9 things. So it's a little bit limited. And like I said, I need the assistance to switch out the pages. So now we're getting to the dynamic displays. This is probably what everybody thinks of when we talk about AAC is iPads, right? Yeah. So these are the high-tech devices. They change screens when I touch it. So I touch a button, it changes the screen. I touch a folder, it opens up whatever is inside that folder. So if I touch foods, it opens up to a page with cookies and crackers and pretzels and chips. It can be represented by pictures, words, or both, so all of your vocabulary on there can be a little bit of what is best fit for the child. So if you have a child that is literate, they can read. You can have a system completely made of buttons with words in it. If they can read, they can touch the word. If not, you can use real pictures, so you can take pictures of things in their environment, or you can use symbols if they're a symbolic learner. We can use grid displays, which is what this is right here. Those are the buttons, if you think about that. Or you can use visual scene displays, which is something like this. You take a picture of the environment or the thing it is that you're talking about, and those little squares are hot spots, is what we call them. So when you touch that part of the picture, it will speak a really specific message. There's been lots of research out there now about grid display versus visual scene display, specifically in autism, and we've found that visual scene displays are really beneficial for learning because it's more concrete. You know, if you're talking about your bedroom, it's easier to talk about your bed inside your bedroom when you're looking at a picture of your bedroom. So dynamic displays, they can either be dedicated or they can be a non-dedicated tablet. So your dedicateds are your Dynavoxes, your Prankiromics, those have lamp on them. And then you have your non-ones that are your tablets, like your iPads, pretty much your iPads, iPhone, iPad. Apple runs the market on communication systems. There are a couple on Android. They're few and far between, and they're not as strong of a system. So pretty much your choice is iPad, iPhone. So there's a little bit of debate on what's better. Is it better to have a dedicated, or is it better to have a tablet? I'm going to pull all of this up so I can talk about it. So the dedicated system, you're only using this for communication. We aren't using this to watch videos. We aren't using this to play games. We aren't using this to take pictures even. All that we're using this system for is to talk. They're relatively durable. A Dynavox, they used to encase them in titanium. So if you threw it, it wasn't going to go anywhere, but you can imagine how that felt when you threw it and it hit you in the head. But they're relatively durable. They have really good customer support. If you have ever had to deal with Dynavox or Prankiromic, they have a whole team that will help you if something goes wrong. If your system's starting to crash, you can call and get some help with that. And also they are, right now, covered by insurance. So your dedicated devices are covered, so they can go through your medical insurance. The tablets you can use for multiple purposes. So you can use them to surf the web and go on YouTube and also have a communication device. Probably not the best option, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. They are really, really breakable though. Like I said before, like that iPhone, you drop it just the littlest bit and then your screen is gone. They have pretty variable customer support. So has anyone dealt with Apple Care? I'll take that as a yes. It depends on who you talk to, right? It's just variable customer support. Also, the apps that are ran on it don't have a really consistent customer support team. It's kind of based on sending an email out into the little cloud and waiting for a response. And iPads themselves, or Android tablets themselves, are not covered by insurance. So if you went to your insurance company and said, I would like you to pay for an iPad, they are not going to pay for an iPad. Both of them, though, have a relatively large storage capacity. They both support growth in language, and they both have really high quality vocal output. So that's really the strengths for all of these. Dedicateds are very, very expensive. So like I said, they're in titanium. It's expensive. Your Dynavoxes run in the $8,000 to $12,000. You can get a refurbished iPad for like $299. So they're a little bit cheaper, but if they're breaking all the time, cost to benefit ratio. All right, so we talked about one is covered by insurance and one is not. So how do I get a device? How do I figure out what is right? So we talked about a bunch of different devices. We talked about a bunch of different types of AAC. But how do I find out which one is right for me? Do I pick, Caitlin really likes to use Dynavox, so is that what all of Caitlin's clients are going to get? Nope. Nope. That's not how we pick the system. So how do we get that AAC system? How do we pick that device? So you get a referral from your PCP, or if you go in the schools, you see your speech therapist there. We do the evaluation, we do some device trialing, and then we help out with funding. So that's kind of my role as a speech pathologist, or any speech pathologist's role in identifying an appropriate system. So the goal is we're going to fit the system to the child, not the child to the system. So I'm not going to say, okay, well in this school, I have iPads with ProLoquo. So you need AAC, you're getting an iPad with ProLoquo, and we're going to make it work. And if it doesn't work, then I don't know what to do. That's not the answer. So for us, we're going to go through and we're going to find the skills of the child. We're going to find the strengths and we're going to find the needs. And then we're going to match the system to those. Those are your features and your functions. So we're going to say we need a big button size. We need a small number of buttons on the screen. We need it to be black and white. We need it to support actual pictures. Those are the features and functions of a device. And I found all those, and I'm going to see which ones match. So we do this through doing an evaluation. So there are kind of 5 W's that we look at in an evaluation. I kind of termed these on my own as the 5 W's. It's not an actual protocol, if you will. It's just what we do in general as speech pathologists. So the who is your first W. So who is the client? What are their skills? What can they do? What can't they do? And also, who are the team members? So who is making up a team for this client? Because like they say, it takes a village. It takes a village for implementing AAC as well. It's not just one person. And then we're looking at the what. So like we said, what are the skills and what are the needs? What can the client do and what can the client not do? What are the needs? If we're looking at a 3-year-old versus a 30-year-old, their needs are going to be different. So we need to look at what are they going to need to communicate? What are they going to be talking about? And then the where. So where are they going to use the system? Are they going to be using it primarily at school? Are they going to use it primarily at home, primarily in the workforce? We're going to look at where are we using it. The when is it needed. So not all people that have communication devices are using it all day long. It might be that after several hours they fatigue and they cannot, produce sounds the right way and they sound a little bit unintelligible. You can't understand what they're saying, more of like a dysarthria. So when is it that they can't communicate their needs? Or I'm getting really frustrated. So now I'm about to have a behavioral outburst. And when those tensions get really, really high and the fits are about to come, the words don't always come out, right? So when we're in a moment of a full-on blowout with a behavior, can we always communicate what's wrong? Or when we're feeling really sick, can we communicate what's hurting us or how we feel? So are those times that we need a system in place? And then the why. So what are the goals? Why did, the parents or the teachers or the support staff, why did they bring it to your attention that we need a device? What are the goals for the client and what are the goals for the system? So then once we do the evaluation, so part of those 5 W's, we find out the what are they able to do? We do formal testing, right? So we look at language skills, vocabulary skills. We also look at their visual skills. So how many buttons can they identify in? And then how many buttons can they discriminate between? So if I say that they can have 16 buttons on a page, but you know what? They start to break down when there's more than 9 buttons programmed on it. So they're able to see the button size of 16, but they're not able to tell the difference between them when I start putting a lot of distractions in the background. Those are things we look at in the evaluation process. So once we do the evaluation, we move on to trialing devices. So the nice thing with, if you come for just a straight AAC evaluation, we trial a whole bunch of different devices that day in that moment. But if you don't have all of that equipment, you have to find it to trial it. You can't just say, this sounds like a really good idea. Let's just give you this. That's not going to work. So there are lending libraries that you can borrow from. In Pennsylvania, we have 2 separate lending libraries that we can use to trial different systems. Typically, across states, there's at least 1 lending library. You can also contact the device companies. So if you contact Dynavox, they will lend out a system. If you contact Pranky Romic, they'll lend out a system for you to try for a short amount of time. While you're trialing it, we take data. We take data on how much help did they need? How many times did they go to the system? How many times did they use the system? If you hand a child a new communication device, do you think they're going to be able to use it independently day 1? Probably not. So it's a lot of learning. And we're not expecting to see data on 100% independence. We just want to see data on, are they going to it? Are they trying it? Did they need less and less help while they're learning it? You know, did they respond well to it? If I keep putting a system in front of my child and they push it off the table, it's not going to help them because they're resistant to it. We want to find something that works really well for the individual. So once we trial everything, we take data, the whole team should sit down and settle on what system works best. So I always tell everybody you want to try before you buy. So when you go to the store, you try on your pair of jeans before you buy them. You try on the dress before you buy it. Has anybody downloaded an app on an iPhone and you're like, ooh, this is not what I thought it was, and you paid like $5.99 for it. It's only $6, but you're stuck with it. You can't get a refund. So these apps range from $50 to $300. And if it's not the right one, there's no refund. So you always want to try it before you buy it. So now it's our part as the speech pathologist, we write up a report on what we found. So we did the evaluation, we trialed all these systems, we talked to the parents, we write up a report just to kind of generalize what worked and what didn't work, and why. Why did it work? Why didn't it work? We also get a doctor's prescription with a letter of medical necessity to show that this is something that's going to benefit the child, and we find funding. So you can either go through private insurance if you're using a dedicated device, like Medicaid, you can also go through that. You can also, if you were going with something like an iPad or even a dedicated device in your school age, you can talk to the district about getting the system for the child if you're school age. There are also local community services and charities that you can talk to, and you can apply for grants towards systems like that. And hopefully not have to pay out of pocket. So what is the goal of all this? We just talked about a whole bunch of different systems and evaluations, but what is the goal? Why are we looking for these systems? So all these AAC users, the end goal for using the system, we want them to communicate a message to participate in conversations, because socialization is so important, right? We want to be able to participate in our environment. We want to be present. So we want to communicate the message to participate. We want to communicate at home. We want to communicate at school. We want to communicate on the job. You want to learn your natural language. So using that AAC system out of the box, you may not understand all of the things that are on there, but that's going to become what your natural language is. So we need to learn it. That's our goal. We want to learn that language. We also want to use it to follow social rules. So if you think about when you're growing up as a kid, if your friend said, hey, do you want to come play with me? But you don't have a way to communicate yes or no. You're not following those social rules. Or if someone asks you a question and you can't answer it, that's breaking down those social rules. We're not able to participate in them. We also need to meet our personal needs, which is number one for us with these communication systems, right? We want to be able to communicate what we want and what we need. And also medical care. This is super important, especially when you have multiple medical diagnoses such as seizures, any sort of, internal problems like heart problems, gastrointestinal issues. Having the ability to communicate these medical needs is so important, especially in an emergency. So, whose job is all of this? Team, right? The whole team. So it's not just speech therapists, it's not just the parents. It shouldn't be on one person. So it's parents, family members, teachers, speech pathologists, TSS, direct care staff. It's everybody. So if you think about it, if we push it on one person, and I'm just going to use this example as speech, if it was only the speech pathologist implementing the system, we say on average, kids receive about 75 minutes of speech therapy a week in the schools. So that's somewhere between once to twice a week. So that's our average. That's about 1.5% of their waking hours. That's the only time they would use that system. That's the only time they would be exposed to that language, is 1.5% of their waking hours. At that rate, it would take over 8,000 hours of instruction they would be about 85 years old before they learned enough language instruction to use, that first word, those first words that normally developing children use. So that's why it's a whole team. We can't limit it to once a week, or only while we're at school, or only while we're at home, because we're not getting the full experience. It's going to take a really long time. So I'm going to ask a couple questions. You can yell it out. Fact or fiction? Using AAC will prevent a child from learning how to talk. Fiction, right? So it's been proven, there's a lot of research demonstrating that AAC strategies don't keep children from learning how to talk. It provides a really good consistent model, it's decreasing frustration, and more children are being found to use more verbal speech after the introduction of their system. Next one, maybe. So, fact or fiction, a child with a severe physical handicap can access an AAC device. True, right, fact. So there are a variety of access technologies that we use, and this kind of falls in that assistive technology that we talked about in the beginning. So what we have here is a head switch that will move through the device to access the individual symbols. And there's a finger switch, there's a camera for eye gaze, and also the one with the straw in her mouth is a puff switch. So when you blow air, it moves the cursor across the screen to access the symbol that you need. Fact or fiction, some kids are not developmentally or cognitively ready for AAC. Everybody's like, I don't know. That's why we're here. Fiction. So there are no prerequisites. So the way that AAC used to be viewed is that there are prerequisite skills. You have to be able to identify a picture, identify an object. You have to be able to match the picture to the object. You have to be able to do certain skills. So there really are no prerequisite skills. It's more of a prerequisite of learning. So we have to provide more instruction is really the process that goes to it. The key is finding the right system and the right strategies to implement it. Mm-hmm. Right.
That level, if I don't get your help.
Right.
And they were like, oh, great. As long as she doesn't know that the train is trained, then we're not helping.
Right. Right, right, I understand. Yeah. And there are still individuals that will not provide services if your child is nonverbal. You know, there are some places that in the schools, well, I'm only working on articulation. I don't work on these things. If you're not verbal, I'm not going to pick you up. Best practices as a speech pathologist, specifically governed by ASHA, which is my kind of overseeing system here in the States, is that then I need to teach you the language and I need to teach you the verbal communication. And if I don't, then I need to provide you a system like this and I need to teach you all of that vocabulary. So, yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right, absolutely. So And that's kind of our fight that we're going through now as like AAC specialists and people that really focus on AAC is trying to spread the word that AAC is not going to slow down the communication. So if you have a verbal child, people are really hesitant to give them a system like that because, well, they have words. So why do we need to? And providing, for people outside of the field, providing them with the research to help support our place on it. Advocating is a big one. So as a speech pathologist, I would have to fight the district, or I would have to fight the teachers or the special ed directors and advocate for it. Alternatively, I have some resources at the end of this too for finding AT specialists that can do more of like an outpatient sort of evaluation outside of the school district. So if you're not necessarily getting what you need inside of the district, looking for another professional outside to do the evaluation to kind of help you identify what would be helpful for your child. I have one more in here. So there is one application that is best for all individuals. Fiction, right? So some apps might be a good fit for some clients, but there's no one size fits all in AAC. Similarly, saying that all children that have apraxia need to get this system, and all children with autism need this system, and all children with expressive language disorder need this system. It's not diagnosis specific, and it's not child, like medical diagnosis or language diagnosis specific. It's specific to the child and their individual skills. So it's never one size fits all. So just a couple tips and pointers. You want to keep the lines of communication between home, school, outpatient, workplace. You want to keep the lines of communication open so that way whatever's working in one place might benefit someone in the other place. I may not know what's working great for the school therapist because I'm the outpatient therapist, but being able to talk back and forth is really beneficial for us. The AAC device is only as effective as the instruction provided and the team implementing it. So you need all team members to be invested. Everyone needs to understand their part in this program. Time and commitment are required to learn how to use the devices effectively and to keep current with the vocabulary. So the vocabulary you need when you're 5 isn't going to be the vocabulary you need when you're 15. So you need time and commitment throughout the process as you're going on. And then you want to keep the AAC systems dedicated to communication only. So including things like games and videos or other distractors, they're going to limit their use for communication. So you don't want them on the same system. Because if I have the choice to watch, me personally as a almost 30-year-old adult, if I get the choice to watch BuzzFeed videos or communicate with someone, I'm probably going to watch the BuzzFeed videos. So similarly for, a child, if I get to watch YouTube videos or tell you something, I'm probably going to watch the YouTube videos. So you don't want anything on there but communication.
One iPad,
Mm-hmm.
and another one is the
Right, yeah. And typically we differentiate them. You'll do like a really fun colored case on the one for games, but maybe only like a blue or a red case for communication that's more just durable and not as like fun and, maybe not having a character on it, so that way you can differentiate them. So these are just some resources for you guys. So the first one, and I believe this all gets uploaded so that you'll have it. But the first one is the AAC RERC. So this is a research consortium. So you'll find a lot of research on this website on AAC. So they constantly do research in this field. And there's also webcasts on there that are really, really good. The next website is called practicalaac.org. It's written by speech therapists, but it is really user-friendly, especially for educators and teachers, for how to implement the systems within the classroom and throughout daily activities. The next one is the ASHA ProFind. So if you live in an area that you want to maybe find your own independent speech pathologist or find out who's in your area, the ASHA ProFind you put in your area and it will list all of the therapists that are okay with releasing their information. So you can find who's in your area and what areas they really work on. And then the last one is RESNA. RESNA is the governing property for AT professionals. These are your assistive technology professionals. Assistive technology professionals work with switches and adaptations and wheelchairs and also AAC. And you can find a local AT rep in your area through that website as well. So, any questions? If you do, they've requested that I have you stand at that mic to ask me a question so it can be recorded. Everybody's like, no, I'm good.
Yeah, I have a nonverbal 28-year-old who has a limit. I mean, she's not wanting to show you anything. It's what am I doing in this moment? But I've found my biggest barrier is just that everybody's always locking up her devices because they don't want them ruined, or they're even, I mean, we're down to a communication book, but her program doesn't allow any individualized ownership on anything, so they put her book away and only take it out when they want to talk. So I don't know if you know any ways around these barriers, but I find it incredibly frustrating.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you think about the system itself, that's the voice, right? So if I take away an iPad or I take away a communication book, I've just taken away the voice, right? That's our means of communication. So a lot of it is more education for staff members and staff, like staff in servicing. So depending on what kind of program it is, a lot of it is education for all of the adults that are around her. So if, you know, she has does she do like outpatient speech therapy at all, or do they have it inside? Right. Right. Yeah. So the biggest goal, so the question is like they take it away unless it's time for them to communicate with her because they don't want to lose anything. So a communication book is relatively easy to replace. You can photocopy the pages and make laminated copies of it. And that's a pretty easy fix for if it were to get lost. My personal recommendation would be is to talk directly to the speech therapist and see what her rationale is for why they're taking it away, and expressing, you know, that is her only means of communication and that is her voice. And there's no way for you to take away the voice of a verbal vocal child. So it's not okay to take away the voice of a nonverbal child. And I think that's the biggest take home that I have for everybody when I go and do trainings. You know, I was an AT lead in a school for really significantly behavioral children, and my big take home was, you know, they would take it away during behavioral fits. You can't take away the voice of the verbal vocal child that is screaming at you. You can't take away the voice of the child that relies, you know, over here. It's just the different place of my communication. So really being the advocate of, you can't take away my voice.
I have a 5-year-old daughter.
Okay.
Who's nonverbal. And we really want to focus now on communication. So we are trying PECS
Okay.
now. So we had the speech therapist, the school, her ABA therapist, which is very rare in Switzerland because it's
Right.
like kind of non-existing, but we found it. We had all a meeting together, and I still find it very difficult how to start something. It's it feels like such an enormous. I don't really know how to begin with it.
Right.
Do you do it like 100 times a day, every time she wants something, because we're so enthusiastic and that's what she wants, but I feel like
Right.
I'm putting her off. Then I said to the school, so how are you going to do it? She's in a special needs school. I said, how are you going to do that? Every time she wants to have something, does she have to make a demand? So we still have to direct her hand and then give the object to her. And then the school was immediately like, oh no, we cannot do that every day. And I was like, every day? I'm like,
Yeah.
She's 8 hours in the school, so what are you doing with her if you cannot do that, if that's one of the main goals that we have for her?
Right.
And so at home we try to do it as much as possible with all the carers we have and everybody who's watching over, who's helping me with it. But I still find it very hard to integrate, instead I say,
Yes.
integrate it in her daily life. Should you start with just at special hours or special moments, or how do you build it in?
Right.
It's a big question.
Yeah,
but
right.
That's the kind of point where we are now.
Right. So there's a very, the reason that PECS doesn't always work is that there's a very specific protocol. And if you don't follow it with fidelity, you don't follow through with it across settings and across times, it doesn't always work. Because it's, why do I have to hand you this picture when I'm here, but I don't have to hand you the picture for the same exact thing when I'm in this other place? It's consistency. So there's plenty of research on PECS itself. And if you want to come talk to me after the talk, I can give you some specific resources to show them on how to implement PECS itself. But the general consensus is that it should be used across settings. So you don't want to start with, 50 different picture cards. You want to start with very limited, right? And you want to find those things. So the ones that you start with probably aren't going to be things that she's requesting all day long. So you're not going to want to do it maybe with water, because you want her to be able to have water, throughout, because that's a general need. But, maybe it's a specific toy that she always gets during these set times throughout the day. So anytime that she's doing it, she has to get that picture card to hand it over. So it should be used every day, and it should be used at least across settings. I wouldn't say in the beginning that you're going to do it 24 hours a day, because we don't ask for the same thing 24 hours straight through. But yeah, absolutely, it should be used every day in the school.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering, we're interested in using the iPad for my son, and he's a very visual person. He doesn't work with symbol pictures, like cartoon pictures. So we're after something that we can take actual photos of items, and maybe have between 2 up to 4 choices on the screen, and that he can't really point, but something he can touch, so that's why no more than 4, and it gives the voice output, so like apple or drink. But yeah, just wondering if you have any suggestions of iPad programs for that.
So, and the thing is, so he can't isolate the one finger to point, but there are these things called finger guards that you can put on the screen. So if you find, visually how small buttons can be for him, they have these overlays that go on these on iPads or on communication devices, that it's kind of like a guard and it blocks. So if he were to, push down, it would stop him from touching everything around it. So it kind of guides in to those specific locations. So that way, that's more for kids that they could maybe do these 3 fingers, but not this one. So as they're coming down, it's like this right here. There's a little lip here. So as I come here, I'm stopping, right? So that can help guide him in on that. There are plenty of apps out there that allow for actual pictures. Most of the communication apps on iPad are, you're able to change the symbols on them to actual pictures on them. You could take actual pictures. Thinking offhand, Go Talk Now has an application that does, actual pictures, and you program that whole thing yourself. So that's you programming everything in it. But also, per local to go, you can go down to a field of 2 to 4. Most of the apps you can get pretty small on the fields. I believe Avaz you can get down to a field of like 4. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, there are several apps. I have a whole list of them if you want to come see me afterwards, and I can kind of lead you to some. But I would recommend, getting like a really thorough eval, so that way you find out, maybe this one is better because it scrolls left to right versus up and down, and this one is better because of the vocal output is this versus recorded message. So that's some things you want to look at before you go ahead and get an app for him. Any other questions? Thank you very much.